a lot of these players who are now going to be characters are going to have some type of relationship to this world itself. What I'm thinking is that since Ace here is a blacksmith, then Kyle, who's Kyle0654, Darkman and Gandarian, who were both additionally with him, very good NPC programmers, just like Ace, there should be some type of Masonic order of craftspeople who are able to create weapons and items. What that might actually do is explain what Armageddon's trading post is by origin. Armageddon then could be perhaps the leader of this coalition, trading weapons for these different craftspeople. So Ace here is the head craftsman whose little station, and I want it to be interesting. I don't want it to just be like a manufacturing center where people are working on anvils and things. I think it should also be kind of a weapons graveyard of sort where there's different pieces and parts laying around in the grass, almost like a metal junkyard. Something ancient medieval, not something modern. You just want to use your imagination there. Because I think that it gets boring when it's like, oh, hey, this is where they make weapons. Oh, hey, there's the anvil where they pound the steel. There's got to be something interesting about it. What that would be, I don't exactly know. I don't want it to just be a boring place where weapons are forged. I think it needs to be just something super interesting. So how that gets tied into all this, I don't know. But Armageddon can be at the center of these trading things. So Armageddon is one of the people that taught me how to hack the Doom Sword, by the way. That's a very historical moment in Graal history. So what I want to do is I want to capture this. And Armageddon, he was in Jesus Freaks, and he ended up becoming an admin as well. So when he had taught me to get the Doom Sword, I was able to kill Pachuca, the god of mischief. So I think that capturing this idea that Armageddon has a Doom Sword of Antago, the god of gravity, that kills the god of mischief, I think that this can tie into this story over here, especially with the temple of the god of insanity. The Freaked as the god of insanity is very real lore. This is very real and very much a part of my fucking game content. Very much a part of the story of our history as a community. And we were an open community of game developers. So all of our narratives and stories and lore are inspiration, open to each other. Where Freaked as the god of insanity never got fleshed out, it's because Unix Mad, the pedophile, decided to start making some power plays and started stealing everything and banning people and lying about history. Freaked is the god of insanity. His stuff never got fleshed out. I think that is a disgrace. It needs to happen. I like the fact that it's 25 years later and that it's happening. I think that there's something interesting about that. Armageddon is my friend, and he gave me that trading post. He fucking gave me that trading post. That trading post was a gift to me from our time in Jesus Freaks, which was a church. It was not Unix Mad's intellectual property. It had nothing to do with Unix Mad. Armageddon's trading post is my fucking trading post. That is my trading post. It was created by Armageddon and gifted to me. And Armageddon also historically taught me how to use the Doom Sword, which I used to kill the god of mischief. And it was impossible because Pachuca was a cheater. So I want to capture that. I want to capture that. Where something is interesting here, where Armageddon has some purpose to do with the weapons forgery over here. So Ace, as the one who coded the trident, he has this place where I think it needs to be like a magical place where he forges the trident and other things. I don't know exactly what those other things are, but I want it to be fascinating and interesting and mythical. Armageddon, who had taught me to use the Doom Sword, I think that Armageddon should be somebody who teaches the ways of ancient forbidden weapons and magic and practice. Because I view the memory editing that we were doing, I view that as like a form of magic. It gave us magical powers and allowed us to do things in-game that were not available. So I think Armageddon needs to be some type of magical weapons teacher. And things like the Doom Sword, which he had taught to Antago, the god of gravity, that killed the god of mischief. Armageddon has knowledge of forbidden weapons. And so he is dealing weapons that Ace, Kyle, Gandarian are creating. And it ties into these people, right? Because you're viewing nodes in a lattice of relationships that need to come together. So what I'm viewing here is I'm thinking that there needs to be certain businesses that are tied to these players. And I don't want all of these to just be businesses, but I do want some of them to be iconic businesses that are tied to their lives. They're not just people living or having little headquarters or whatever it is, or having little shops. They're also people who work in connections and groups together. And so Darkman, as an NPC coder before, he was really good at creating creatures. He was very good at creating like coded creatures of sort. I don't want to go too deep into that just yet, but what I am picturing for Darkman, just to go on a tangent here, is that Darkman owns Eastward or Eastward Splinter. I might change it to Eastward Splinter just because I think it might be easier to say. Maybe I'll just change it to that for now. Darkman owns Eastward Splinter, and it's a splinter here that divides Spider's Web from the rest of the region. There's likely a reason for that. You don't know exactly the reason for it, but what I'm picturing Eastward Splinter to be is some type of... So it was originally like a coffee shop that I had put for Bommies in Graal 2001 toward the Golly race. So there was a canal that I wanted to call that the Golly race. I don't know if they did much with that, but I created the trophies for it, and I think that they started doing racing based off of my original first race, because I created races for the Bommies. And by race, I mean not like a special race, but or a genetic race, but like racing through water. They were in marathon racing through swimming canals. And so I called it the Golly race, and the Golly race led to Eastward Splinter. So maybe there's something to do with a Golly over here. Maybe this river here is called the Golly or something. So let's just go ahead and do Golly River or Golly, or just call it the Golly. So I'll color code that later properly, but I'm just going to put that there for now, the Golly. So anyways, I want Darkman to be the business owner of Eastward Splinter. So Darkman does stuff with Eastward Splinter, and I think instead of it just being like a coffee shop like it was before, I think it needs to be in more theme, and I think it needs to be a little more clever and thought out. And I think what I want it to be is, instead of coffee, I want it to be tea. I want it to be a tea house, an ancient tea house. And maybe there was something to do with prophecy there. Maybe Armageddon did some prophetic work there with reading tea leaves. But most, and perhaps more interestingly, this was also a sushi shop. So maybe there's like weird mutant fish and stuff that start to like go in there, and because now it's underwater. But when it wasn't underwater, it was just a sushi shop. And perhaps it was a cover business for, I'm thinking of something like, like samurai, like ninjas, something of this hidden order of warriors, something of that sort, where there were these underground type mercenaries who did things with katanas and such. Armageddon likely sold katanas and weapons here over, I'm picturing kind of like Kill Bill-ish, but there's like this hibachi type grill sushi place that is primarily basically a tea house. So they specialize in bizarre fish and tea, but there's katanas hanging on the walls and things of that sort, and perhaps some type of weird training going on in there. Armageddon would use this place as a hangout and recruit people into his mercenary circle, and he would teach them forbidden ways of fighting. So the Doom Sword could be an ancient weapon of lore. You hear about it, perhaps you never get it. It's mentioned in reference because Glowtica is the throats, the open throat of destiny, which is like the open bay of water that spills over the plateau into the lower regions from atop the Acropolis. So I'm viewing some lore about the Doom Sword and the God of Gravity and Armageddon's connection to it being discussed in various places. And of course, the player is going to want to get it. Can you get it? Maybe you can't. But I do think that there's something interesting about the idea of a Doom Sword, and Armageddon is behind it. And because he's behind the shipment of weapons and training and stuff, and recruitment of mercenaries, he's also involved with the craftsmen. So you have Ace, Kyle, and Gandarian. And Darkman's not really a weapons craftsman, but he is some type of craftsman of sort. And he creates various things. So Gandarian, Kyle, and Ace are close friends with Darkman, and they hang out at Eastward Splinter. Of course, now they're not going to be there, right? Because the world's underwater, but they used to hang out there. Ace, Kyle, and Gandarian hung out at Darkman's Eastward Splinter frequently. And Armageddon would go there. I assume that they were part of his underground mercenary network. And Armageddon would deal weapons to them and teach them how to use the weapons. So those weapons were originally being served out at Eastward Splinter, perhaps under the table and undercover. So you didn't really know that was happening. You would have to like be in the network, and maybe it was like a deadly network where like, if you tiptoe too close to the sun, Icarus type situation, where you fly too close to the sun and the mercenaries kill you because they think you know too much. So it's very deadly and it's very dangerous business. What happened was the Armageddon's trading post had continued on. So even as this ancient world had disappeared, Armageddon's trading post that you find at the Acropolis of Destiny is just a continuation of the ancient business. It's the ancient practice. It's an ancient brand. So that they were not only top quality, but they were serious business. Perhaps the trading post that exists in Destiny today is not as potent as an ancient original Armageddon weapon. All of his ancient weapons are all underwater now, if they exist at all. That's the type of lore I'm creating here. So Armageddon's weapons are the best of the fucking best, and only the best use them. But they don't exist anymore because this world has long been lost to water. Ace has a trident. Perhaps Armageddon had sealed the trident with his approval, and the trident was part of the trading post at some point. And so the original trident is likely, I think, a better place to obtain it would be in Glowtica rather than in Destiny. Unless, of course, you can find out down here that the trident had been passed through generation to generation and stored and hidden inside a hidden wall inside of Antago's manor. But whatever's happening here, Kyle, Gandarian, and Ace are part of this weapons forgery manufacturer network, and I think their houses should all be different styles. Maybe Kyle's is almost a little more brutalist, but of course still medieval, and Gandarian's is perhaps a little more gothic, and maybe Ace is a bit more bare bones and magical. So they all have their own style, and they're not really houses, but they're these elaborate places that could also possibly double as houses where they would live in their headquarters. But Armageddon here, this is where he lived originally, and he was very much connecting these people together, running an underground mercenary fighting coalition at Eastward Splinter, which is basically a cover business ran by Darkman, a tea shop, a sushi tea shop, like a hibachi sushi tea shop, ran by Darkman. And so Darkman does other things there. I'm not going to go too deep into that. Eventually, you'll have to get some type of special weapon or something to get over here into the spider's web, and that will allow you to defeat this area in order to get to Lycia. So this doesn't have to be called Lycia Cave. It can be like Lycia Hollow. Godspeed. So Ganmon was a magnificent artist, and he could like draw awesome stuff. I'm picturing Ganmon. Maybe he was involved with Eastward Splinter, and maybe he did portraits, like he drew portraits of warriors. Something along with God, like he did statues of warriors and stuff. Let's get a little more realistic here. So instead of like drawing warriors, maybe Ganmon did statues of warriors. He was a sculptor. And so Ganmon has sculptures of warriors, and maybe you can try to piece parts of broken statues back together to try to figure out who and what is involved in certain things, especially in this underground merchant network. I don't want it to be too boring where it's just like, oh, there's a network and there's like warriors and there's like broken statues. You piece it together, then you like go here and you go there and you go there. Like, I think that's boring. I still want it to be super fucking fun. Like, you do have to have boring stuff just to have the underlining of the world itself. But how and where that gets translated to the player, I think needs to be done in a way that's super fun and exciting. A lot of games, I think they get stuck into the details and they like push that off into the player because they don't take it to the next level. I do think that there needs to be an interface between mundane details and the user interaction. So where and how that gets interpreted into the player's experience, I don't want it to be boring and I don't want it to be monotonous either. It needs to be a good balance of both. It needs to be somewhat deep, but also a bit shallow so that it's fun in the way that it's created and translated. Anyway, that's just one aspect of what's happening here. So cereal, I think that there can be something to do with beer and brewing barley. Beer comes from brewing, different types of hops. So the word cereal to me, which comes from the word ceres, I think that he specializes perhaps in like sweet beers. I want this to be like a pub. I don't know if maybe it's an outdoor pub or something too, or something. I'm not sure how to make it exactly extremely interesting, but I want it to be fun and awesome. This needs to be like Cereal's. I'm going to go with Cereal's Roadhouse. I know that doesn't sound very medieval because the word roadhouse to me has imagery that I'm liking. So it's almost like this truck stop type place with a lot of history. So a lot of fights and weird things have gone down. You can come here and hear and learn tales of what's happening or has happened around the area. Because when people go there, they get drunk and the bartenders are drinking with them and rumors and things get told here. So I think that there's something about Cereal's Roadhouse as being like an information center of history from people's drunken tales. And Cereal himself, I think, needs to be he's like a hostile bar owner. He's very critical and nasty and hard to get to. I don't think I want to do ghosts. I guess their ghosts could be here, but I think that ideally the characters just don't exist anymore. It's just the stories of what happened here. We know of who Cereal was, and perhaps there are, weird underwater creatures who carry rumors and stories of it, and there's like places to get information and things like that. So Serial's Roadhouse, I think, needs to be perhaps so while things were more kept under secret at Eastward Splinter, Serial's Roadhouse has a little more information for you because that's where things get messy and a lot of fights broke out and a lot of history and rumors and backstabbing took place because it's a roadhouse, it's a pub. So Godspeed, maybe he was like a figure in the area who helped keep things in order, and Gandarian was as well. Because remember, Gandarian was a police chief, quote-unquote police chief. So I think he needs to be like a knight, a chief knight of sorts. True Heat, I think it also needs to be an artist. And so maybe True Heat is an artist of the area who would design certain things, and he worked with Ganmon, and maybe Ganmon and him had they were ultimately friends, but they had like a love-hate relationship going on as characters because both of them are artists. So maybe True Heat did more like pictures, and Ganmon did like statues. I think Armageddon is mostly more of like an arms dealer. Maybe this is why this is Ace's Pass, and this is like a gun shed. So they have a weapons storage arsenal up here for the various knights, right? And maybe Mania is just another knight who's part of the Admortarsh. And Admortarsh, I think, needs to be a legislative district. So Manuel, or Manny, needs to be a part of that, but he's up here just to kind of cover a further reach. And then we also have the gun shed. And the gun shed, I think, needs to be tied into the weapons so that they have access to various arsenals or things up here. And so I think the gun shed needs to be interesting as well. I think the gun shed could be like a bizarre weapons storage, and I think it needs to be still guarded by weird creatures. But Ace's Pass is, for this reason, a passage that they could get to. So the Gestalt and the Dismal Crossing, these are going to be controlled by two skeletons. And they switch places, and you don't know when they switch places. And they change it up during different times of the days. They change it up. What happens is, one of them always lies, and one always tells the truth. And you don't know which one's telling the truth. Now, the one who tells the truth has gifts for you. He's a good guard. He has things for you, and he tells you, I have these gifts for you. If you will receive them, you may pass or something. And if you take them, he'll give you a gift. But the other one will say that, he'll give you something, and if you accept the offer and he's lying to you, he'll sleight of hand you and take your stuff. So, like, he'll rob you of tons of stuff. You're not really going to want to cross these regions. It's very much becomes a type of gambling. You might get a little something, but you also might lose everything at the same time. So the Gestalt and Dismal Crossing has almost like a Russian roulette type function to it. The rest of these, I don't know. I haven't plotted them out. Again, we're just taking it piece by piece. I do think I want to do something like a Sphinx somewhere. What happens in the Temple of Insanity, I don't know fully yet, but I do want to have a giant Sphinx somewhere. And I want to have a place where Ganmon and True Heat, with some of Golgamek's help, are presenting artwork to the public. So there needs to be a gallery, but I don't want it to just be an ordinary gallery. Maybe it's a museum, and maybe it's interesting. Maybe Freak's Temple of Insanity is a museum. Or maybe there's a museum up here. I think that if we keep the museum here, then this area becomes fleshed out, and then these become different stories unto themselves. And we'll have to figure out what those are. So this has a story, Admortarsh has a story, and then these also have different stories. I don't know where the museum's going to be, so maybe the Temple of Insanity is like this freak show type, House of Horrors type museum that maybe at the time was benevolent, but over the ages, especially being underwater, has morphed into this disturbing, what's it called, like those madhouses that you go through and you can't get through. There's like halls of mirrors and things like that. I don't want to do it exactly like that because it's too modern, but I like the idea of there being like a funhouse type effect, but in an ancient medieval type way of weird things that have once existed and been morphed and taken over by enemies, and like there's going to be a boss that you have to defeat, right? So I don't know what happens to him, but there needs to be like something here for Freaked that ties into Freaked. You get one of Freaked's items. I don't know what that item would be. So one of the things that we know about Freaked was Freaked had created the stables. So the stables that you see today in Destiny, that was Freaked's. Freaked created the original stables for Destiny. So maybe there's something to do with a horse. You can get like an epic horse of something from the Freaked Temple, or a crazy saddle that lets you do awesome stuff. Or we do something even different, and maybe there's a Graal, right? Like maybe there's a purple Graal. I don't think they ever did a purple Graal. So maybe there's like a purple Graal that has some type of purpose to it, and you have to go to the Freak's Temple of Sanity to get to the Graal. I don't think the opposite boots are the best thing. Maybe the opposite boots are in there, or maybe not. I think maybe something a little more along the lines of something relating to Freaked as a person might be better, something new and different. But if we did something that was also an item that actually existed before, like the opposite boots, one thing that I've always loved about the opposite boots, like I've never told this to people. I don't think I ever told this to people, but I actually liked the opposite boots more than the gravity boots. I always thought the opposite boots were, you could see like in old screenshots of me, my feet were like orange because I was wearing the opposite boots. Like I loved the opposite boots because one thing that you could do with the opposite boots, and I don't think people ever gave it much attention, was you could walk backwards and hit people with your sword backwards. You had to learn how to do it though, because you had to learn how to walk backwards. The keys were backwards. You could literally like fight players backwards, and you could always, as you were running to get away from them, you could slash them, while, and then you could turn the boots off and flip around and like fight them and go at them, and then you could turn them back on, hit them as you were like running away. So the opposite boots I always thought were like such an epic fighting tool. I don't think other people figured out how to use them properly. So maybe the opposite boots are in here, or maybe they're somewhere else as an appetizer to something bigger that you're going to get at the Temple of Insanity. But whatever it is, you're going to need whatever something's going to happen to get from the Temple of Insanity, ultimately get past the eastward splinter over into the Panniers, which is now Spider's Web. So Spider's Web has taken over the Panniers. The Panniers is, completely taken over, and as you traverse the gully here, which is going to be very difficult to do, it's not going to be so boxy either. The gully, I think, needs to be a deep ravine. The ultimate end goal is to get out of Glowtica into Lycia's Hollow. You need to get to Lycia. So I think one thing that I wanted to, I guess, elaborate on is underwater rivers and waterfalls do exist. They're typically sediment. So when I say that there's underwater like rivers running here, I know it's not, so some of you, you're probably like, that's not a thing, that can't be done. That's not true at all. I just wanted to clarify, in case some of you were unaware, that underwater waterfalls and rivers do exist. In some places where old trenches of rivers existed that have now been taken over by water or been carved out by rivers, there are sediment flows. Either it's rushing very fast or it's moving very slowly and you can't walk over it because it's a crystal waterfall. So maybe it's very like sparkling, crystalline, almost luminescent crystals that are being pushed through this old bed of the trench. And there's like a crystal waterfall of just old crystal sediments that perpetually pour down and, like barf down. As gross as that sounds. I like that though, when you're talking about like puking crystals. I think that's weird. The idea of like, barfing up crystals out of the mouth of the river down the tube of the central canal here of Leucodasia. So maybe the canal, I don't know if this is the Leucodasia Trench or whatever it is, or we rename this river here and keep the waterfall called Leucodasia, or just keep the whole thing Leucodasia. But this is going to be like a crystal sediment rushing here. That's moving. So either it's moving very fast and you can't get through there. For one, maybe it'll cut you up and shatter you to pieces. Like it's moving so fast that the crystals will just like cut you up and kill you. Like it'll just slice you into pieces and dice you. What is the term for just being grated to death? Or it's going to be, instead of being a shredder, it'll be just something you can't get past because it's chunks of rubies, chunks of weird crystals that you can't, maybe not rubies of currency, but like chunks of crystal. I think it should be like luminescent and glowing and fostering some sense of whimsy and mysticism. In terms of other parts, I do want to eventually name these rivers, or not these rivers, these streets, and I want to name the houses. I do want to have a gallery somewhere. Again, I don't know if that ends up becoming the Temple of Insanity, or if it's maybe it's a bit of both. Maybe there's a smaller museum and this is the bigger one. But I also like the idea of having some type of sphinx somewhere. I don't know where that's going to be. I don't think I don't feel it's proper to rush things. I think you get a start and then you really think of things through before moving forward. So I don't want to rush these other parts, but we do have a template that is starting to unfold. And so this is the latest update.